Questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, does he stand by all of Treasury's forecasts for the planned sale of state-owned enterprises?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, as the member will know, Treasury prepares its forecasts independently, but the answer, I suppose, is yes.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, why is he promoting a policy which he described today at Select Committee as, quote, selling hydro dams to buy prisons, when the return on those hydro dams averaged 17% in the last 5 years, and he himself calls prisons a moral and fiscal failure?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, there does seem to be some confusion about the return on SOEs. There's been a figure quoted of 700 million of dividends, which is not in fact correct. That actually exceeds the Crown's dividends from all sources, SOEs, Crown entities and CRIs. The true figure for dividends from SOEs is probably about 350 million, and the member might find that changes his calculations.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Question in no way
this
raised
a point
the
of order?
issue of the dividend flow.
Order. Is this a point of order?
Question. Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable David
The
Cunliffe.
Minister hasn't addressed the question, which was the comparison between selling hydro dams and purchasing prisons had nothing to do with the dividend flow that he's quoting from the Select.
Order. If I recollect the member's question correctly, he did mention a figure of returns from SOEs, and the Minister disputed that figure, as the Minister is entitled to do. Supplementary question, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, to the Minister, why did he repeatedly claim at Select Committee today that selling our public assets offshore will help reduce our international indebtedness? When his budget, you weren't there, Minister,
Order.
So reduce our international indebtedness when his budget shows net international debt rising by over 8% of GDP in the next 4 years.
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, because it helps us avoid the need to borrow. So, yeah, international indebtedness is going to rise, depending on how the mixed ownership model turns out. We'll borrow less than would otherwise be the case.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, why do his forecast financial statements not fully account for reduced dividends from the assets he wants to privatise, but do fully count the revenue and interest savings from those sales?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure the member's interpretation of the figures are correct, but as I said at the Select Committee, the government's objectives are not, in this case, are not purely fiscal. However those numbers turn out, the government wants to provide New Zealanders with an opportunity for sound investments. We want better performance. We want better performance from those companies. And frankly, we'd rather pay dividends to New Zealanders than interest to foreign lenders.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, will the Minister admit that his promise to return the Crown accounts to surplus by 2014-15 is not credible, since it relies on rubber accounting of unmandated asset sales, $1 billion in cuts he hasn't even allocated, revenue predictions which are $4 billion more than IRD forecasts, and an economic growth track that nobody believes?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, but under almost any feasible assumptions for the government's budget, we'll be borrowing billions less and have much smaller deficits than any feasible counting of the Labor Party's promises so far.
Question number 2, Rahui Katane.
Thank you, Mr.